Okay, so okay. It's very exciting. So, yeah. Party like can.
I know, exactly.
Yeah. That's great.
I'm going to make a brief introduction of what you want to start. Who you are. I have a spread three on very brief one and water for you.
Oh, thank you.
And you can find us here.
Okay.
There. You can just that's your thing.
I'll just sip on water real quick.
Sure.
Okay.
I didn't. Well,
Whoever me when I was sitting for
First time? Yeah, it's lovely.
yeah.
Drive-in was great.
Yeah.
There's the river and the
So
Performing Arts Center.
So you went to school in Missouri.
Yeah, it's giving me Midwestern like Holland vibes, which is awesome.
Are you from Missouri?
Yeah, I actually grew up in Columbia and went to school there. Yeah.
I lived in Missouri in 2006 in St. Louis.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I work in St. Louis.
Just,
Oh,
like,
sure. Yeah.
you know, you don't have to worry about it. I'll handle like recording.
I just put this here.
Yeah, and then you can just
Go for it.
roll up waistband, yeah.
Okay.
And Zach, you have a presentation.
I do.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So can I?
Yeah,
put it on
yeah.
display?
It's set up. I already have it recording. It's just recording your slideshows. So, and then I'll just be in that recording.
Okay, so you'll have like a visual of the whole
Yeah.
setup plus the slides and hopefully the audio coming through.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, just stop me if like there's a tech issue and the pause or anything.
Yes.
Is this like your? Just like it.
Yes.
Okay, that's great.
Does this in volume too if I play video?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, I can. We can control the volume here. Like there's just a button here, like that you can control. the
If
volume.
it seems quiet, I can just move
Yeah,
that around.
yeah.
Okay, great.
No, I.
Talk a lot about today and would love to just learn more about sort of like what you all are studying and like the qualitative and the quantitative realm that you all have, I think, have had recently in your curriculum. So happy to also kind of like have some Q&A and discussion. If any folks want to pause and raise their hand and chat more about or have questions, feel free to stop me. Love to have a discussion. So let me launch. This is me. I've been at CNN for about 11 years, always kind of in the product, audience, marketing and growth area. I started off building mobile applications for CNN in the early days when that product was just getting off, and launching. So I've seen sort of the arc of growth at this company and throughout digital media at large. Did anybody grow up in a household without a cable subscription? I'm just curious. Like, raise your hand if you didn't. Okay, so no cable subscription. Okay, yeah. So there's like, I guess, sort of a bell curve there too. So actually, yeah, quantitative research. That's like an interesting data point. Usually I'm surprised by how many folks grow up in a household without CNN as sort of like a brand name on TV. But as you know, like increasingly cord cutting is leading to us needing to pivot our strategy to be more of a direct to consumer facing company. So, previously in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, cable television is like a model that's like a kind of a cash business model. You know, you've got 200 million households paying 25 cents per household on the cable subscription. You can do the math, like what that is monthly. That audience is declining big time, so we've got to make sure content is king at CNN and ensure that we're distributing it, making it super compelling, and attracting new audiences who are willing to pay. So increasingly my focus is around sort of that subscriber audience and the subscriber strategy. So I'm just going to talk through a few sort of frameworks here. I think it's really important when thinking about audiences and marketing, nailing your why. I'll talk through that. Some ways to understand your audience and potentially classify them to understand like what's working, what's not working. Defining jobs to be done, and then some frameworks to think about in the test and learn body of work. I think with the nail your why sort of category, there's really one big problem in communication, and that's the illusion that it's happened. We're in a world where we're increasingly, sort of our attention is increasingly divided, and we're having to really get sharp about capturing users' attention, thinking about how to have content break through in a noisy world. If you're like me, like you're doom scrolling constantly on TikTok, you wake up from that and you're like, what did I just read? What did I just see? And too often I think we're exposed to content that we don't remember or acknowledge, and that's a huge issue. So to nail your why, think about you know, some of your strategic goals. In our case, one of our North Stars is to make CNN essential every day to our users and customers. This is just a thumbnail image of one of our excellent reporters, Donnie O'Sullivan, who is consistently sort of diving into like the disenfranchised right in our country. Some people call it the manosphere, and really figuring out what's going on there. And he does an excellent job of like speaking to questions that our audience has, like that's very distinctive, and is just one example of somebody who's making CNN essential every day to our users and customers. You know, along with Donnie and other talent delivering impactful reporting, we have video storytelling that engages a changing audience. Obviously video is so important now with the proliferation of mobile devices, the user behavior of wanting to be like immersed and completely engaged. CNN has an advantage there where we're basically a giant video machine that has turned this out, but has to rethink how we're doing it, the format, the delivery mechanism, the hooks. We have a global footprint that delivers more perspective than a lot of our competitors, and we have fact checking and a huge robust system to keep users informed about what's real and what isn't. So all of this is great, but it's actually quite boring when you sort of like present that to an audience. As Professor Marcus may have given you flavors of this idea, like people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And like we have a lot of examples of this in action. Our most recent was an email campaign last week that was our most successful yet for driving new subscribers. And it really just leads, as you can see, with this idea of like our purpose and our mission. We share your belief in the truth. Power essential journalism in a time when it matters most. So it's kind of appealing to this idea of having journalism in the world as a force for good. Living in a complicated time, how might CNN help you navigate this? And it also, I think, instills this belief, or reinforces it if you have it, that there is sort of an objectivity that you want to reach in terms of information that you're seeking out. So other companies do this extremely well too. Apple is like the holy grail of this concept. If they started with like what they did, It would also be fairly boring. They sell computers, phones, and tablets. You know, if you've got a how, it becomes a little more interesting, design elegant, user-friendly technology. But if you start with the why, challenge the status quo, think differently, you're really getting at the core of like why people, what people associate with Apple, why they might buy Apple products. So this is the Simon Sinek Golden Circle. I don't know if you all have talked about the Golden Circle at all in marketing, but Simon Sinek is sort of like an inspirational speaker. You can find his YouTube videos online, and he does a great job of explaining this concept of starting with the why. I think and of course, like if you think about Apple and the why here, it's like you think of their iconic sort of counterculture campaign, thinking different. Speaking of iconic, Taylor Swift does a great job of this. I mean, her why is turning personal emotion into shared experience. Her how is authentic storytelling through strategic reinvention. Her latest album, I think, did a really good job of showing how she's living a happy life. And I know that America is divided on like a happy Taylor. I'm very personally happy for Taylor. So that's my take. But most of America disagrees, I think. And you know, her what is you know, music and experiences. I was at a Taylor concert in Liverpool and got to see sort of firsthand like the fandom there and this like shared emotion, the thing that Taylor is trying to accomplish with her why, and it was pretty awesome to see. So if you look at the Golden Circle concept for CNN, pursue the truth, tell important stories that are essential and engaging, and then we do that through video on demand, streaming articles, live stories, newsletters, podcasts, lots of different delivery mechanisms. So I think when you nailed your why, you really also want to understand your audience. This is just an example of it's kind of a mixture of a qualitative and quantitative study, but us having landed on a cohort that we would call the digital seekers. It's about 31 million people. In the US, they are frequent news consumers that want a wide range of news topics. We find that the core audience at CNN is one that strives to really pursue that truth. Like they're looking at all different sources. They're extremely news literate. They're you know, trying to get all angles. And CNN is like one of those properties that they're seeking information from. So what we did was we did a lot of user surveys and came up with sort of a content affinity grid. There in the bottom left, like some of these content affinities are not surprising, but basically this like high propensity audience, this core student audience over indexes for US news, political news, weather, natural disasters, global news, social issues, and human rights. So you kind of get a little bit more of that like that audience that's seeking sort of like a force for good in the world, and climate, nature, and environment. When doing these particular studies, having that content affinity on a topical axis is a really good place to start, because you kind of start thinking about, you know, what is our production mix? Are we doing enough weather and coverage of natural disasters in the US and around the world? You know, this might indicate that there's an opportunity there, or a strategic opportunity to offer more of that, or in a different way. Some of you may know that we are actually launching a weather app at CNN, and really focusing it around community and sourced photography and sort of like the educational piece of the weather, of weather coverage. And then, you know, this audience is also very into getting, like I said, news from multiple sources, consumes more news than most friends or family. So they're sort of, they kind of have a singular behavior. They gravitate toward our news topics, and they are motivated by important causes. So this gives you like a slice of one of the high potential audiences for CNN. And there's a lot of this that we have acted on and are going to act on. But it's really just important for a qualitative view to get a sense of like what are people after. and who are they? And we'll go back to some of these here in a second and how they tie in. So I find that when thinking about the work, defining the jobs to be done is really important. I don't know if anybody here has studied content marketing, but essentially, you know, if you can figure out what the user needs are, is it to educate people? Is it to, you know, help them understand something that's complex? Is it to entertain them? You can start classifying your content in ways that makes it much easier to understand when to publish, when to promote, and how to distribute. And I don't know if anybody here has heard of Clayton Christensen, but he was a Harvard Business School professor who was super focused on disruption and technology. He's got a lot of great talks on YouTube and things. You can look him up. But he had this sort of idea of like the jobs to be done model, and he explains it really well. McDonald's approached him to think about how to increase their milkshake sales, and he has this really interesting way of thinking about the jobs to be done framework, and discovering through that there was a milkshake market that was 7 times larger than they had originally thought. So I'm just going to play this video real quick, and we'll come back to that here. The volume works.
We decided that the way we teach marketing is at the core of what makes motivation difficult to achieve. The most helpful way we've thought of it so far is that we actually hire products to do things for us. And understanding what job we have to do in our lives for which we would hire a product is really the key to cracking this problem of motivating customers to buy what we're offering. So I wanted just to tell you a story about a project we did for one of the big fast food restaurants. They were trying to goose up the sales of their milkshakes. They had just studied this problem up the gazoo. They brought in customers who fit the profile of the quintessential milkshake consumer. And they'd give them samples and ask, could you tell us how we can improve our milkshakes so you buy more of them? Do you want it chocolatey or cheaper, chunky or chewier? They get very clear feedback. They would then improve the milkshake on those dimensions, and it had no impact on sales or profits whatsoever. So one of our colleagues went in with a different question on his mind, and that was, I wonder what job arises in people's lives that cause them to come to this restaurant to hire a milkshake. So we stood in a restaurant for 18 hours one day and just took very careful data. What time did they buy these milkshakes? What were they wearing? Were they alone? Did they buy other food with it? Did they eat it in the restaurant or drive off with it? It turned out that nearly half of the milkshakes were sold before 8 o'clock in the morning. The people who bought them were always alone. It was the only thing they bought, and they all got in the car and drove off with it. So to figure out what job they were trying to hire it to do, we came back the next day and stood outside the restaurant so we could confront these folks as they left, milkshake in hand. And in language that they could understand, we essentially asked, excuse me please, but I gotta sort this puzzle out. What job were you trying to do for yourself that caused you to come here and hire that milkshake? And they'd struggle to answer, so we'd then help them by asking other questions like, well, think about the last time you were in the same situation, needing to get the same job done, but you didn't come here to hire a milkshake. What did you hire? And then as we put all of their answers together, it became clear that they all had the same job to do in the morning, and that is they had a long and boring drive to work. And they just needed something to do while they drove to keep the commute interesting. One hand had to be on the wheel, but somebody had given them another hand and there wasn't anything in it. And they just needed something to do while they drove. They weren't hungry yet, but they knew they'd be hungry by 10 o'clock. So they also wanted something that would just put down there and stay for that morning. Good question. What do I hire when I do this job? You know, I've never framed the question that way before, but last Friday I hired a banana to do the job. Take my word for it, never hire bananas. They're gone in 3 minutes, you're hungry by 7:30. If you promise not to tell my wife, I probably hire donuts twice a week, but They don't do it well either. They're gone fast, they crumb all over my clothes, they get my fingers gooey. Sometimes I hire bagels, but as you know, they're so dry and tasteless. Then I have to steer the car with my knees while I'm putting jam on them, and then if the phone rings, we got a crisis. I remember I hired a Snickers bar once, but I felt so guilty I've never hired Snickers again. Let me tell you, when I come here and hire this milkshake, it is so viscous that it easily takes me 20 minutes to suck it up that thin little straw. Who cares what the ingredients are? I don't. All I know is I'm full all morning and it fits right here in my cup holder. Well, it turns out that the milkshake does the job better than any of the competitors, which in the customers' minds are not Burger King milkshakes, but it's bananas, donuts, bagels, Snickers bars, coffee, and so on. But I hope you can see how, if you understand the job, how to improve the product becomes just obvious.
So kind of a fun little story that demonstrates this jobs to be done theory, and like he's like very into milkshakes, so that video gets kind of weird at times. But I think it does strike like an interesting point, which is the jobs to be done theory is a task or goal or objective a person is trying to accomplish, and the problem they're trying to solve. How do you look at products from a different perspective? What do you hire in those products to do? I think you can think about this with content as well, and especially in the marketing space. You know, with the sort of declining attention span of people, just consuming media, it's so important that you make a connection early and often, and that's the hardest thing to do. I mean, that is, there's so much noise out here that it's becoming an increasingly tall task to get over that assumption that you've actually communicated to someone. I think when you're thinking about this particular milkshake story, you find that it's really not a story about like stealing market share from a competitor. It's about discovering what users actually need from that, and that is to just have a more manageable drive, so they're not juggling bagels and getting in car wrecks or whatever. This guy actually has 3 hands, so he doesn't have that problem. You probably know how I created this image. I think when you're looking at the content, you really should be also thinking about these jobs to be done. So I also just want to introduce this other character, Dmitry Shishkin, who's closer to the news. He worked at the BBC and then became a consultant, and really, I think, taught the BBC of how to think about the user news model. The research that they conducted showed that users wanted to be educated, kept on trend, inspired, amused, and not just updated with news. I think the problem, whether it's sort of like audience, content, or product, or marketing, the problem's sort of the same. It's sort of an engagement issue. Too often people are focused on this side of the equation, the functional, which is just update me. Like what happened? Was there breaking news? Was there a government shutdown? That's great. We definitely need that information. However, there are 1,000,002 sources all doing that with sort of the basics of the headlines. Do you want to be the 1,000,003rd? Maybe, but you're not going to stand out. This is a very commodity space. Information is so cheap now, especially with proliferation of AI, that there's just stuff being churned out all the time in this area. What you really want to do is to think about, well, what kind of distinctive content do my audiences want from me? And it might not be all of these particular jobs to be done. It might be that my audiences really actually want some updates, but also, once that news is sort of following into the day 2 category, and that storyline might not be as sustained, give me perspective on what it means. At CNN, we're finding that a lot of people who are potential subscribers find expertise as something that they value highly in the national security space, folks who created 20-point peace plans before, to tell them like what's actually happening. And I think that's probably a larger trend of people seeking out experts in authenticity. But you know, this is an engagement solution. It's thinking about all the other angles that you might be able to tell this storyline through, and really like engage and create some habituation with your audience. This is just an example of a staggering success with this user needs model at the BBC. This is actually, I think, data from Russia BBC, but at the time, they found that they could actually reduce the number of stories that they had that were just breaking news and are updating me, and reduce actually a lot of the others too, and refine them, but you know, produce more, keep me on trend, and produce more to educate me, and that led to like a very large increase in audience, which I think underscores the really key point that volume is not probably the best strategic starting point for companies today in terms of like, you know, if we just publish more articles or we push more out there, we'll have organic discovery. It's harder and harder to do that. There's a lot of search headwinds. A lot of people are using ChatGPT or Perplexity or other services to get their information. So if you build it, they will come is not necessarily a driving force anymore. So you know, you want to do stories that are really going to reach and engage, and think hard about what your audience really is wanting from you. So you know, we've done this at CNN in a few different projects. One is called Rising Tide, a few years back, where we looked at not the jobs to be done necessarily, but topical authority. What did users come to CNN for? Was it investigative journalism? Was it sort of analysis, or giving you like a sense of what the news agenda means to me today? And found that people were coming for those things. We could do more of those and actually less of them in other areas. So if you, going back to that sort of classification system, if you've got a good way to identify your content or slice it in terms of jobs to be done or authority areas, it's a really good starting point to think about, okay, what's our production mix? How might we optimize this for what our audience is consuming? Some of you may have seen this in sort of some marketing circles, the content honeycomb, and it's sort of just like a 7-point kind of an idea generation board for content marketing. There's also a version of this for social that goes into like community and presence and like a few other dimensions. But in the news space, we can really, I think, optimize these to think about what are our news stories doing for our audience? Are they showing me the impact of an issue? Are they catching me up, which is similar to Update Me that we just talked about? Is it going deeper on a news storyline? Is it helping me understand, connect me with others, help me live my life? These are all things that users want, but maybe not at all times, or maybe not all users or on all platforms. So it's really, I think, useful when looking at these jobs to be done to layer in other audience considerations: time of day, seasonality, is it a weekday or a weekend? What context are we in? Are we in a busy news cycle where Washington and the administration are making a lot of changes and people are really seeking out, helping understand what's going on and make sense of the complex? The platform, there's different user affinities, like we're just looking at the overall digital seeker audience. That will change based on what platform they're consuming content. Some platforms are better for sort of the lean back stories. Others are better at keeping users on trend, like newsletters. So, and then just overall content affinity. If you're able to classify these in some way, and if sometimes this is very hard. I have spent hours kind of manually tagging things at times because you're kind of relying on the systems that you have available to you. whatever metrics, dashboards you're using, they're not going to necessarily group things together like these are stories that show people the impact, because that takes some judgment to be able to group those. But AI is actually starting to become a place where that classification is made a little easier. If you're able to throw a chart into ChatGPT and give it some prompts to sort these into groups based on these 7 points, and you might need to adjust the prompt a bit to actually get there. But it's drastically reducing the time it takes to classify content. Once you've done that, you can really study then what's the engagement and the reach of these stories and at what time. I think the superpower is, once you've charted that out, is to just try to trend hunt for what's working and try to get after a why. So let's say that after the Trump Zelensky summit, there was a big spike in stories, in interest in stories that help people understand. We had a good story by Claire Sebastian that had a headline right after that summit that was why Putin may never want a summit with Trump, which was a really interesting angle, pledged to sort of explain a reason why maybe this peace, the road to peace is sort of blocked. And it did really well. So, maybe that was the spike, and we start to conclude that, hey, these help me understand articles, users are seeking out for big global security issues. That's a hypothesis, right? Maybe we're seeing connect me with others and go deeper, like stories that show people traveling abroad and finding interesting pockets of the world, or stories that are going really deep onto policy and explaining what it means. Maybe those are doing really well over the weekend, Saturday and Sunday. That could start to become a distribution strategy. We should aim to publish these over the weekend and promote these over the weekend. So if you're able to classify and you're able to sort of attach, reach and engagement metrics to these, you can start to trend hunt and use the user needs model to get after the needs of your users. I'll just give it a real world example of a recent job that we were providing our users on CNN. Of course, this is a big homepage layout that describes the government shutdown, and it's giving users lots of context. How long has the government been shut down for? What's the sort of the rolling updates around what's happening in Congress? Where's the blowback? But you can see here we devoted the sort of what we call the right rail to this area of help me live my life, which I think does have some overlap with how does this impact me or how does this impact the world? But we've got a great vertical video that goes in depth into what it means for you, and then an actual sort of business story of what should you do with your 401k or your finances, that we actually positioned as a for subscriber story, and a lot of users were actually willing to pay for that information because it gave folks a sense of certainty at an uncertain time, and pledged to answer some key questions about finances. And we found that these help me live my life types of stories do really well in this context where there's lots of uncertainty, lots of breaking news. What does it mean for us? It also just does well when there's a lot of utility value at stake. It's sort of in the same sort of business realm when there's a Fed rate cut decision, or whether they decide to cut or not. We can often publish stories that give some financial pointers, and there's lots of engagement in those. So this is sort of us doing the job and packaging it in a way that makes it clear to users, hey, this is CNN as a source for this type of information. Again, words like your, personal, making it clear that this isn't just going to be a copy and paste type of piece on what happens to personal accounts during a government shutdown. This time could be different. So it's underscoring why users should care about their finances during the shutdown. We've also had a lot of recent wins in the Help Me Understand space. Some of you may have seen Trump's UN speech. It's unprecedented in a lot of ways. We have a really great analytical writer, Stephen Collinson, who was able to weave in what that speech actually meant by doing a few things, giving sort of play-by-play highlights of the speech, but then putting it in the eyes of world leaders and what they actually heard and how it might impact policy and just big ongoing conflict. And so this was again a 4-subscriber story. A lot of people are seeking out this help me understand type of piece when they see an opportunity to learn a lot in a short amount of time, as opposed to having to go and piece it all together themselves. Like I said, our audience of digital seekers, they're out there, they're also reading the Times and the Journal and things, and but when we're offering the service to really catch people up and help them understand in one place, they really gravitate toward that. So again, help me understand is a job to be done. And then, once you've got sort of this classification of the jobs to be done framework, you really want to figure out, how can we find out whether, certain jobs are more important than others, and what, is actually going to work for us and our audience. So, when you're looking at growth can mean a lot of different things. You really are asking probably what is your strategy. If you believe that sponsorships and ads are your opportunity for incremental revenue, you're probably looking at trying to increase the number of people you're reaching. Maybe not through volume, right? But through more creative distribution tactics, through just more engaging storytelling, more distinctive angles that are really going to resonate with your particular audience. You might be looking at recirculation, once they're there, trying to keep them there and generate more impressions. The classic tactic that I don't think really flies much anymore is somebody lands on an article and there's this, a gallery, and every time you click that gallery, the ad impression fires. That's kind of the dark arts a little bit, and we don't do that. Organic search and GEO referrals, generative engine optimization, so AI citations and referral links are becoming a bigger source of referrals. So you might be looking at that. If you believe that your company is actually really just sort of like a startup, and you're playing in the intellectual property space, and you're going to exit at some point, you want to drive up valuation, maybe you're looking at time spent and lifetime value. If you believe a direct-to-consumer relationship will power a strong subscription funnel, a strong subscription funnel usually relies on all of these things. But you're probably also looking at those really direct relationships with customers and consumers, like newsletters, or their habituation, trying to find a proxy for just how loyal are they? Are they coming back frequently? Ours at CNN happens to be more new visitors. And really, this is an area that we're focusing on a lot right now. Like I said at the top, people are cord cutting. TV cable subscription revenue isn't going away, but the ad market online is also not as strong as it used to be. You can't just generate impressions and get the same revenue that you were before. How can we really strengthen our offering and have a direct relationship with consumers who are willing to pay for CNN content? So that's kind of the area that we're in. I find that getting further along in this requires some really good hypotheses generation. Probably created a hypothesis before, but basically, action or condition and expected result. This is an example. We publish climate reporting that takes users deeper, so there's a job to be done. Then cold audiences, like audiences that aren't as familiar with CNN, will convert to monthly engaged users at a higher rate because they will recognize topical authorities So that's one hypothesis that has the action. We're going to create more climate reporting, taking users deeper, and hopefully that's creating habituation, getting folks engaged. That's strengthening our user funnel. The BBC user needs model also has a really strong principle of, if you're going to have an engagement metric, attach it to some commercial outcome. So, if you're really trying to push anonymous users into a consideration phase, attach that to the very specific, metric of increased propensity to pay. Maybe it's actual subscriber ads. So you really want to have a commercial impact as part of the expected result when you're looking at changing your strategy or testing a hypothesis around your strategy. And in order to get traction, it's really important also to consider all the hypotheses that you're generating. If you've got like 10 of those, get sharp about what the impact versus confidence level is on these. So, in the case of doing more climate reporting that goes deeper, we think that that's a high impact, high confidence hypothesis because we know a lot about our audience, and we know a lot about our content in that area, and we think that that's one that's an opportunity. So that as an example, we were looking at that digital newsseeker sort of qualitative research earlier. Climate, nature, and environment was an area that they over-indexed on. We think that if we do more of that, that's going to be a high impact. If we look at our history of actually going deeper on climate, we also have a high degree of confidence that content will perform. So you kind of want to triangulate some of this research to help form your hypotheses and really get to testing. This is an example of a story we did, I think, earlier this week, that is going deeper on climate. I like to say stories like this have high job integrity. What I mean by that is that, the mission of going deeper in a climate story or an environment story is really clear to the user off the bat. This headline even, shows that this is enterprise reporting, that we actually have real reporters traveling or across the world, going into harm's way in a way that maybe you don't traditionally think of a reporter doing. It's not a war, a battleground, but they're touching things and they're using products and they're doing things that could potentially have harmful impact, but they're sort of everyday stuff. And you've got cues like our other locator webs, Hong Kong, New York, London. That's showing that this is distinctive. Not every news organization can be in all these places. So it's great that we're calling that out. It's format rich. There's probably going to be video. Even before clicking in, that it's going to be deeply researched. So it's got a lot of good entry cues to this job. And so users who encounter it are probably going to say, hey, let me actually click in. That's a huge win. I think 1 in 6 users on our home pages, and this is pretty industry standards, are just scanning headlines. So if we can get one more user to actually click into content and to read and to have an impact with that user, it's huge. So again, it's all part of that funnel and trying to get folks to do one more action. And then this story has high job integrity because the payoff was really high. Once you actually clicked into that story, you find that, okay, yes, there's stuff that I can learn from specifically. There are infographics that break down the difference between the chemicals that linger in your body for a day versus linger in your body for a month. It's all just sort of fascinating and in-depth reporting that is fairly actionable in your daily life. So, that payoff is high, and so this story has sort of a high job integrity and really is serving those users who are interested in climate. After we published this story, this is just a Google trending console screenshot. this one actually had a ripple effect. People searching for chemical wristband tracking spiked. That term actually went up to 100% of its typical volume right after that. So that's a bit of, again, use sort of making use, but I think is affirmative of of a user behavior that clearly values that information, is taking action. And then hopefully, some of these users who are searching for this, may have heard of the CNN story. Maybe some of them read the CNN story first and started searching, and others might just see it trending in other places because of the CNN story and end up coming to CNN if they hadn't before. So some of this will represent incremental user engagement, which hopefully supports our hypothesis, right? Like that we're getting more users engaged monthly on CNN. So again, if you do this process on repeat, create your hypotheses, sort them from high impact, low confidence, high impact, high confidence. You eventually are going to get enough repeated trials to validate, what's working, what's not, and you're able to just sort into high impact and low impact because your confidence is becoming higher. And then there's still just, the job sort of never ends. When you're operating in this high opportunity area, let's just say you've convinced your marketing agency or you've convinced your newsroom that, if we publish more climate stories that go deep, that they're going to perform well. We can't rest on our laurels. We have to keep continuing to learn from the audience. A lot of this will be built on intuition and experience around what works. So there's not going to be a totally sort of proof hypothesis, and we want to continue to evolve. Sum up, know your strategy, form your user needs hypothesis, size your hypothesis by sorting it into your high impact, low impact, low confidence grid, test it out, measure it, see if it's working, validate, convince others in your org to go ahead and lean in or lean away from certain jobs to be done, and then measure that impact. So we talked a lot about a lot of different topics. Know your why, know your audience, define the jobs, test and learn, and just want to open it up for questions or comments or things anybody wants to talk about. I can talk more about my own journey, but happy to discuss, and thank you so much.
That's great, Zach. Thank you so much. So now we can have some Q&A. I will start with questions, so people can also bring their questions if they want. So I will start with this question here. You opened your presentation asking us about the cable consumption, like older people who had cable or who did not have access to cable TV. And of course that CNN had this interest in knowing who had access to cable and who had not. And now CNN is also trying to understand how people are changing, are moving from one platform to another platform, because cable is lagging behind, so we know about that. But of course that CNN also knows that not only people are changing in terms of platform use, but people are also changing in terms of their behavior, in terms of what they want to access to, because now we have so many different sources, now we have so many different outlets to access that we can pretty much choose source that we want to. And so I'm going to connect this with another example that you just brought to us about about Donnie O'Sullivan that you mentioned. That yes, he's a brilliant reporter, and he does bring engagement to CNN. Like people want to know about extremism in the United States. But on the other side, on the other hand, I'm also considering maybe Danny O'Sullivan also disengages another part of the audience. Like sometimes I'm under the impression that that's my impression, my opinion. Sometimes I'm under the impression that he's mocking Republicans. That's my opinion. And so if I am on the Republican shoes, I would think, okay, I'm not watching CNN because they are mocking us if I were a Republican. So on the one side, Danny O'Sullivan engaged Democrats, but on the other side, he disengaged Republicans. So my question is, do you also research people who do not like CNN? Like, I know that you as a professional, as a senior researcher at CNN, like as someone who designs several mixed methods, who uses mixed methods approaches to understand consumer behavior, audience behavior, but do you also try to understand why people do not watch CNN or why people avoid CNN, or do you try to understand why people are dropping out or are canceling their subscriptions, or how do you try to reach this kind of public who are resistant to be a CNN subscriber, for example?
That's a great question. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think what you're kind of getting after is this idea of like a long play with the brand and the tension between that and shorter activation plays with like getting an existing audience to engage more. I think in terms of CNN's position, like on the world stage, on the national stage, very much the intention that it's seeking truth in an objective way. So I think with Johnny O'Sullivan's reporting, when you're seeing him sort of embedded in trying to understand this disenfranchised right groups. I think depending on your perspective, you can come away with different ideas on that. But what I think our audience really appreciates is this lens into the world, that they actually had no idea about. And one of the examples I think that might be a counterexample to the argument you're posing is that particular video was around the backlash with Trump supporters to the Epstein files controversy. So then you have a situation where both sides, I don't want to just characterize things as being two sides because we live in a multidimensional world, but like left and right are both really interested in this storyline around what's going on with the Epstein files and why is everybody in agreement that they should be released. And I think that that was such a fascinating storyline. I think that one was approached with like obviously respect and trying to gain understanding. I think it's one of those jobs to be done is like help me understand this side of the argument. And maybe it's in a surprising way. It's not doubling down on Trump support. It's actually kind of multifaceted and layered. But I think in terms of the methodologies and the research, we definitely do look at what could potentially dissuade folks from engaging with us and what they're doing instead. We're doing very well with engaging our audience and increasing our subscriber count and all of those great things, and churn is very low. But we're constantly studying like why might people bounce. But the overall strategic objective is to really like be that sort of out of the ring player, trying to explain the world to everyone without being the center of the issue. And that's sort of the long sort of tail play. The shorter term activation are probably the ones that we're studying most, which is like, why do people unsubscribe? Why do people subscribe? What is their content affinity? What's their history? Are we doing enough in one area to keep people engaged? And so that's sort of the shorter term performance activation piece. That's a lot of the focus is currently.
I have another question. What are the challenges when it comes to understanding consumer behavior in settings beyond the US? I know that we have CNN, like it has a strong basis here in the US, but we also have CNN International, and we also have some CNN affiliates in other countries. Like we have CNN in Espanol, we have CNN Brazil, we have CNN in other several countries. What are the challenges to understand consumer behavior in these several different settings?
Yeah, I mean, there's some really.
I know that maybe you don't work with these different settings, and I don't know if you work with them, but which challenges in terms of methodology could you bring to us?
Well, I'll give you like a real concrete example. There's a lot of opportunity in our own backyard in Latin America, and Spanish-speaking audiences, in particular, we produce a lot of content that those audiences will want to read. I mean, whether it's around U.S. politics or immigration, or just like stories that are happening in the countries in the South. It's they don't associate with the news brand CNN as much as they do with the stories themselves. So like content is key in that area, and we're investing a lot in having those stories being discovered through search, which is like 80% of our Espanol audience. So in that area, like the goal is to do a few different jobs. It's like what are people asking? Like getting some of those early signals of like what are people asking in Spanish? Actually, literally searching for. Are these stories that we think that they're going to want from CNN versus want from a local provider? And so there's sort of a decision tree there. If it's one that has more global repercussion, or a story that's going to be impact that's sort of a wider concentric circle, then we'll pick it up. Whereas if we think folks will actually see the option, the menu of providers that are actually serving that story in like a search engine results page, then they may skip CNN and go for local. Then we'll turn that one down. So it's, some of that's like a selection of story process, but doing a lot of work to figure out like which ones we'll break through on. I think that obviously the globe is a huge area. The biggest some of the immediate barriers are like GDPR, like just understanding user behavior, and like Europe has stronger laws against cookies, and so it's like that's hard. The other is language. I mean, I think this is an area where AI could really assist all news organizations. Is like if we're producing this content, why can't we translate it? Whether it's through audio or like a literal text translation, AI is fairly good at that. So I think some of the opportunity globally is getting over those hurdles, technical, sometimes legal, oftentimes language. When we do stories about India, it happens to be a large English-speaking country. In addition to just a very large country, those tend to do very well. In my opinion, we should do more. I think there's a lot of work to do globally, even though that we're considered like a global footprint, like with TV and networks and seeing brand being dotted around in different bureaus across the globe. I think digitally there's a ton more to do, and search is like just going back to that specific example, like a really good way to penetrate, because people don't have to be brand loyal; they just have to be really interested in the content.
Thank you. Questions?
Yeah.
So how have you noticed
like AI has like changed over time. So like, you know, when you first started off in your career, compared to now, like what does that process look like, especially for most of us entering the workforce soon? Like, can you offer any sort of guidance to like things that we can look at or work at to be ready for it when we're ready to enter the job market?
That's a great question, and so relevant to this group. I'm a firm believer, folks probably have heard this phrase, that like, you're not going to be replaced by AI, or your job leaving college is not going to be replaced by AI, but somebody who does know AI very well may replace you or replace that job, not you specifically or anybody in this room, but I think it underscores the point that knowing the technology and being familiar with it and being able to speak the language is a really good starting point, and obviously be attractive to employers. You know, generative AI right now has a ton of shortcomings. So this is me sort of like on my own like thing here, like my own personal opinion. I worked a lot with AI at CNN. We're doing a project on headline generation, and in order for that to be a productivity increase, we have the prompts that you see us writing are this long, and they're chained. There's a second and a third before it even generates the 10 headlines we might want to test. And so there has to be a human who's really good at headline writing, understanding SEO best practices, thinking about how users are going to read headlines and understand like what's going to be most clear, what might need attribution, what headlines capture the thrust of the story, and then really build out the whole if-then-else framework of that prompt. If it's an analysis piece, like write the headline in a way that isn't maybe as focused on the news event, because we already have the story on the news event. And so AI hasn't done enough, well, AI is not advanced enough to really understand those nuances. If you've got a skill set that's really deep in one area, but you're going to be able to train that AI platform in that area in a way no one else can. If you can get experience with prompts, really start to understand the shortcomings. I kind of like, I should sort of compare it to how I search for things on Google. Like, I do like a really strange keyword pattern, and if it's like a branded search that I want from a company, then I'll put the company name at the end. Like, nobody taught me that. Like, it's just years of like doing Google searches to figure out. I'm sure everyone here is the same. It's like, you're not asking Google like a full question, like our grandparents might have started to do. We had to figure out how to master that machine. AI is the same in the sense that we got to figure out how to master it, but it is more complex. It changes every month. So my advice would be get your hands dirty. Think about some repeatable things you're able to do with it. And maybe they're specific to the function of your career. And save those prompts and think about like all the thought process and the skills that you brought to that prompt that was able to repeatedly generate something that so at a time that to me that's an app, like that's an application. And it shows employers that you are able to think through critically how to use it, and you'll be fine. Yeah, I mean, I think every innovation has been disruptive, and this one's going to be super disruptive, but it's not, we just have to learn it.
Questions? Yeah?
Are there any ways you're trying to engage with like our demographic specifically?
At CNN?
Yeah.
Yes. So I'm so glad you mentioned that, because aside from some of the things like I showed on the screen with like vertical video, which by the way, vertical video on a desktop, it's sort of like, okay, cool, but like it's really the language of social and mobile, and that's where we're really trying to have a bigger presence. We think that it's not necessarily, well, so I think there's a lot of things that younger demographics appreciate and like, but they're at the tip of the spear of user behavior that's gonna proliferate and become the norm faster than anything else. So I think being always on, being on demand, which is also like not necessarily a muscle that a simulcasting live network has, right? Like I wonder what Anderson Cooper said, like, you're not able to rewind on cable, maybe we posted it on YouTube. But like having that information at your fingertips in a way that's really immersive, like it's a tall order. You guys want a lot, and that's great because it pushes us. But we're competing with the dopamine rush of getting that information from someone that you might already have trust in, following, has like a lot of expertise or passion, and are like authentically displaying that on TikTok. And like we've got to make sure that our stories and our people and the expertise is also showcased there. And so we're doing a lot more of a live vertical video. We just launched some new designs on the app, our mobile app this week. Spotlight design, which is like way more vertical. So some of that's format, a lot of it's production, and we're vastly ramping up in that sort of vertical video, live video space. We're going to be launching a live streaming service later in the fall, and a lot of that's going to have some very exclusive and specific video on demand content that's answering questions that people are asking the internet. Not necessarily coming to CNN yet for it, but we want to be that source. So yeah, we definitely are looking at younger demos for that info.
Questions? More questions?
What are you doing to try to deal with the fact that trust in all media is so low? And you know, what can either CNN or any news organization do about that?
Yeah, that's such a great question. There's a huge trust deficit. You're asking about things that people don't like about CNN. I think one of the biggest complaints that you hear is just disagreement with where people perceive CNN as sitting on a political spectrum, which we don't try to do that. But and that's unavoidable. Every news organization is going to have folks who are like, you're too left, you're too right. I think I'm very optimistic just in the sort of the long game of that, Gary, where it's like with the proliferation of AI and a lot of slop, I think people become savvy to that very quickly. And they understand the difference between really good reported stories versus something that seems sort of copy and paste, loses its critical edge, doesn't help. So I think in a way, let's just say we do nothing, we become an island in a sea of slop that people are going to seek out because they're going to get smart to that. I think that's my optimistic view, but I think we can't just rest on our laurels either. I think we've got to actively combat it. You saw that email campaign where we're really pushing this idea of seeking out truth and sharing belief in truth. I think the way for us to do that is continually show our audience that we can explain something in a way that is not taking a side, but offers people greater understanding. And so we're really leaning into the explainer space too. And I think if folks want a commentary or if they want opinion, or there's plenty of places to seek that out. There's fewer and fewer places that are sort of pure play explanatory journalism, and that's an area we see opportunity that hopefully people start to associate as being a very objective sort of view of the world.
Along with that, do you think media need to market themselves better and more?
Ooh, yeah, that's a great question for this class too. I mean, I would also be interested in what you all think for that question too. I think yes. I think people know what news is, but they don't know what to do with it. And it's not the classic news literacy problem. It's, I think, something bigger. But I think if you're able to show real people how they use the news, the Times has a great advertisement that literally is just showing somebody walking through the streets of New York, sort of like doing the crossword puzzle. Then I'm going to go check on this, and then I'm going to go like kind of like living a life, and it's a little more lifestyle than probably what we would do. But I think you have to show how other people are using the news, people that you might admire, respect, or trust, as a way to garner that. And there's plenty of great cases for that. So I think that would be an excellent marketing. I love the journals advertisement, if you make over 100K, it's your business. Like if, so it's really appealing to this idea that, hey, if you earn a certain amount of money, you need the journal not just for like, what is Warren Buffett doing tomorrow? You actually need it to run your own business of your life. It's your business. So I think there's some clever ways folks are doing it, but yes, I think there's more to do there. I think in terms of the jobs to be done framework, like if it's content marketing, I think it's an educate me job. Not in like a parachuting in and you know, feeling superior to anybody, but like, you know, teach people how they can use this for their benefit. I think there's more to do there.
Questions? More questions? I have a last one. What methodological skills a professional must have to be part of your team?
Ooh. Well, I would say the first thing is a demonstration of critical thinking. I think if folks have a passion for trying to untangle like really complex situations with user experience or with what audience is doing, they just have a drive to understand why they're doing those things. That's, I think, priority number one. I think the methodologies can be taught, quite frankly. I think there's also a user empathy that folks need to innately have. They think about how they use products and that how others might also use it, the same or different. And then also a yes and attitude. It takes a lot of collaboration to get these frameworks and studies into production and getting folks bought in and build teams through the newsroom. And so you want to earn their trust, you want to be a collaborative partner. So all of those things first and foremost, and then we can teach some methodologies. I think that's one of the keys. But yeah, learning, and like you said, like mixed methods. Like there's not just one answer. You really want to get a full picture before you make a strategic decision. So I like what you had said earlier on the sort of mixed methods point. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Zach.